Hi, Sonlanders. Today we talk media and reporting gender-based violence. We're joined by Paula Fray, a respected journalist and founder of Fray Intermedia, who strives to improve journalistic standards and recognizing that journalism differs from other crafts. Paula, you also serve as as the Deputy Press Ombudsman of the South African Press Council from 2016 to 2018. Currently, you do serve on the Press Council of South Africa and you're a board member of Africa Check. Is the media reporting enough on gender-based violence, or are we purely reactive to incidents of gender-based violence?
Thank you very much for having me. I really feel that there are many stories that are still untold when it comes to gender-based violence. I feel that the media can do a lot more, but we have seen over the past year, particularly, an increased demand from readers for more stories, and some journalists certainly have been rising to that challenge and trying to do the story a lot more sensitively and a lot more nuanced.
Well, so when we do have a case of a gender-based violence incident case, and let's say for argument's sake it is a minor, when is the media allowed to mention that accuser's name?
Okay. So the Criminal Procedure Act earlier is quite clear that the media may only name the accused in a sexual offence after they have actually pleaded to the charges. So not when they've been arrested, not even when they've appeared in court and haven't been given an opportunity to plead. They can only be named once they've actually been asked to plead and they have pleaded to the charges.
What happens in the case where someone or a media institution, whether it's print, it's radio or TV, or even online, where a name has been, where the accuser's name is mentioned? What happens in such a case?
So actually, that person would be in contempt of court. Anyone who actually names the person before they've pleaded would be in contempt of court. So it's not even an ethical issue. It's an issue of the law prescribes the way you can or can't behave. I do know that we often when we have high-profile cases of sexual assault or gender-based violence, or particularly with sexual assault, where you're not allowed to name somebody, the public often don't understand why the media won't name somebody who's been arrested. But the law is quite specific in this case. And so there's always debate about how come you named so-and-so, but you didn't name this person. And particularly because sexual assault is such a heinous crime, right? I mean, none of us would want to stand for it. And so certainly we don't want to be seen to be protecting somebody simply because they're high profile. But the media are just not allowed in terms of the law to actually be naming them if they haven't been asked to plead. Once they've pleaded before the court, you can then in fact name them and then follow the court proceedings, unless the judge makes a ruling otherwise.
Paula, and those rules also apply for media publications when it comes to the online platforms. What though if someone else mentions the name and tags the media publication?
The onus really is on the media not to contravene the law, and for the media not to themselves publish the name of the person if they haven't been asked to plead yet. I mean, the person who does in fact name the accused, well, seeing that they haven't been formally charged yet, but the person who does name them, the person and then tags the media, that person could actually be liable to be found in contempt of court.
Is there a fine line where we say, as media publication, we against gender-based violence, and any case like that, we will print it in bold if we have to?
There's always a debate about the role of media in terms of its need to be objective and and to be a neutral observer in certain issues. But there are many cases or many issues where there's a strong belief that the media needs to play an advocacy role. And in fact, the gender-based violence is one of those issues where I personally believe that the media can stand up and be counted as somebody who will say that gender-based violence is wrong and we must do everything to get rid of the scourge in our society. And I certainly feel that a media entity that is passionate about its audience, its readers, would really want to fight to make to improve the lives of their audience, and the way you can do that actually in South Africa right now is to stand up against gender-based violence.
Paula, in your opinion, is there anything that we as media practitioners often miss when it comes to gender-based violence?
One of the biggest roles that the media can actually play is to raise awareness amongst its audiences, and starting off with what gender-based violence actually is. You know, that it's not just physical abuse. I mean, we're often we're waiting to see or we're waiting to see actual harm, physical harm, before we take things seriously. And I think that the media can play a really critical role in highlighting what gender-based violence is in all its different facets. That's the first. And I think the second thing is that it's really important for media also to give survivors or to help people to understand really where they can get help, what kind of help is available, and what steps they can take in order to do that. My biggest concern about coverage about gender-based violence is that it's very often episodic. In other words, you know, something happens and then we follow that one particular case and then we forget about it. And I think if we really want to make a difference, then the media's coverage of gender-based violence needs to be sustained, and it needs to be towards an outcome of change. And I think for me, those are the gaps, that we're on the story when there's a big event, but we need to be on the story all the time.
Are there any tips that you would give to journalists?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what you don't want to do as a journalist is to victimize survivors again. So you don't want to add to the trauma in the way you do the story, in the language you use, in your demand for all the gory details of what has happened. So it's really for journalists who are covering gender-based violence to be sensitive, to be aware, and to understand the power of language, right? The way we describe women, the words we use, all of that have a major impact on it. So that's the first thing, is really to kind of be sensitive to the survivor, and be sensitive to the language you're using. I think the other issue also is for journalists themselves not to be jaded by the issue of gender-based violence. I think sometimes because it's so pervasive in our society, it seems like it's everywhere. We really kind of think, oh, that's not a story anymore. Women get beaten up every day. You know, that's not a story. I think journalists need to maintain their curiosity, but also their outrage that one case of gender-based violence is too much. And we must never get jaded and kind of feel, I've seen this story before, I'm not interested. And the last thing really is that I would urge journalists that if they're constantly covering issues of gender-based violence, is that they also need to be aware that there might be trauma on themselves, that they could then in fact inflict or wound other people around them, and even the sources of their story. So if you're the kind of reporter who's constantly covering crime, constantly covering gender-based violence, that you really need to look after yourself also, and take care and make sure that you're also being debriefed and getting help if you need that.
Paula, as closing, how would you summarize both for consumer, the reader, the viewer, but also for the reporter, media publication, gender-based violence reporting?
So I would say that if, as a reader, I think it's I welcome the fact that readers challenge media as to why they're not naming suspects or accused, and they need to hold media accountable in terms of the way we cover stories, and the prominence of which we give these particular stories. So I would really kind of ask people to continue to hold their media to account, but also to understand that, there's this perception that the media operate without any checks and balances, but we are in fact governed by the law in the country. It's not that we can just simply report anything. So I would ask people to be aware of that and to understand when we can and when we can't report. But for journalists, I would say this is a really important story, and it's everywhere. It's in the COVID-19 story, it is in the finance story, it is in the workplace story, it is in our entertainment, it is in our sports, it's everywhere. We mustn't be blind to it, and we mustn't look for the obvious story. We must really be quite passionate in telling the story of our readers as much as possible.
Paula Fray, thank you very much for your time, and for giving us more insight into the whole topic of gender-based violence and reporting.